tonight, we welcome Russell Chimeno, lead docent tour guide at Beaumont's iconic Saint Anthony Cathedral Basilica. Russell is a longtime parishioner at Saint Anthony's, where he attended the parish school as a child and served on the staff in the 1990s. During his 13-year tenure as Chief Financial Officer of the Catholic Diocese of Beaumont, Chimeno oversaw the financial aspect of Saint Anthony's repairs and renovations. Today, he serves Saint Anthony as lead docent, sharing the history and symbolism of the Cathedral Basilica with visitors from across the world. In 2022, Chimeno, who holds a master's degree in business administration, retired as firm administrator for Mahaffey Weber after 14 years of service. His vast community involvement has included board positions for the Southeast Texas chapter of Texas Society of CPAs, Catholic Charities of Southeast Texas, Catholic Foundation of the Diocese of Beaumont, the Emergency Food and Shelter Program, Some Other Place, and the Mar University Friends of the Arts. Now please give a warm welcome to Mr. Chimeno.
Thank you, Catherine, and thanks to the McFaddin-Ward House, and thanks to all of you for your interest in St. Anthony. A friend of mine gave me some advice about giving a speech. He said, there are long speeches that are often forgotten and short speeches that are often forgotten, so make it short. I have about an hour's worth of presentation, and then we'll have questions. So we're going to begin this evening and look a little bit at the history of the church in Southeast Texas and how it came to be, and leads to the building of St. Anthony, and that'll give us an opportunity to look at the architectural style and design elements. And we're going to look at the transformation process through the years, the repairs, renovations, restorations, refurbishings, remodeling, and through that we'll see works of art. There are two priests of note. One was Father William Lee, who had the vision to build St. Anthony. The second is Father Jerry McGrath, who had the vision to rebuild St. Anthony. Father Jerry came to St. Anthony in 1996, and the church was in need of repairs. He assembled a team. They began an intensive study look at what needed to be done, and they met with many consultants and gathered a great deal of information. He calls the parish together, and he tells the parishioners he's got good news and bad news. The good news was that the parish had all the money it needed to do the repairs. The bad news was it was still in the parishioners' pockets. So for today, this evening, this is a brief timeline on how the presentation is organized. Before 1881, Southeast Texas was mission territory. In 1881, the first church is built, St. Louis. The parish is established. So we were a parish of St. Louis until 1907, when St. Anthony is dedicated. So we're a parish church of St. Anthony until 1966. When the diocese is created. The Diocese of Beaumont was created in September of 1966, and St. Anthony is designated as a cathedral. We're still a parish church, but now a cathedral. Until 2006, when Pope Benedict names St. Anthony as a basilica. We're still a parish church, we're still a cathedral, and now we're a basilica. So just briefly, in this mission territory, we know France controls the Louisiana territories and Spain controls the Mexico territories. All I need to say, there's 2 points I want to make. Spain builds missions in East Texas to keep the French out, to stop the French encroachment. 2 points. The second mission they build is Holy Name of Mary, and the first Mass celebrated was September 8th, 1690. In what was later to become the Diocese of Beaumont. The second point is Spain had a tough time keeping those missions supplied, so they decide to build a way station, a midway point between Mexico and East Texas, which they do. May 1st, 1718, they build San Antonio de Valero as a way station. It's what we now know as the Alamo. Now we have another reason to remember the Alamo. Texas becomes a republic in 1836. City of Beaumont's laid out in 1838. French Catholics begin moving from Louisiana to Texas. Sacraments are celebrated in homes by saddlebag priests on horseback. They're called saddlebag priests because they carry all the supplies they need for the celebration of sacraments in a saddlebag. The Methodists had circuit riders, clergy that go out to missions to minister. Those ministers dubbed this district, this circuit, Alligator Circuit, because of the alligator-infested waters that they had to cross, but also they were sent out with very little resources. So they learned to kill the alligators and skin them and leave them with the locals to dry, and they'd continue on their route. On their return route, they'd gather the hides and trade them for much-needed supplies. So the clergy in this period of time went to great lengths to do ministry. Texas becomes a state in 1845, and the Diocese of Galveston is created in 1847. So on the map, the Diocese of Galveston that was created comprised the entire state of Texas when it was created. And that's really where our records begin. As a point of comparison, on the right, I put a map of the Diocese of Beaumont in 1966 when it was created. Obviously, all these boundaries have changed, but this is for a point of reference. So, sacraments were celebrated in homes. Some of the homes that we know where Mass was celebrated. The Hebert House is the oldest house in Jefferson County, 2 years older than the John J. French House. The Hampshire House, Arsenault House, and Boudreaux House were Broussard brothers, Eloi, Moïse, and Sylvain, and the Bordache House. There were others, but these are the ones that are documented. These families are all related. They marry. So Bishop Oden is the first bishop of Galveston. In 1851, he goes to Rome to recruit priests. And he states his intention to build a church in Liberty and in Beaumont. Liberty is built in 1853. So Southeast Texas at this time is served by priests from Galveston and from Liberty. St. Mary's Church in Galveston was built in 1842, and it was also designated a cathedral in 1847 when the diocese was created. The church is big on record keeping. In the Sacramental Register in Galveston at St. Mary's, in 1847, we find the names Hillebrand and Blanchette. The bell in the bell tower at Saint Anthony is named in memory of Clementine Hillebrand. And in 1853, we find the names Hebert and Broussard. So Bishop Dubuis is the second bishop of Galveston, and he assigns Father Keenan to Southeast Texas. His territory was everything east of the San Jacinto River and everything west of the Sabine River. And he sets out to build the first Catholic church in Beaumont. The first church in Beaumont is built in 1877 by the Methodists and the Baptists. They pooled resources and built the first church in Beaumont on Main and Fannin. Father Keenan hires famed Galveston architect Nicholas Clayton. Nicholas Clayton designed the Bishop's Palace, the UTMB building in Galveston, and St. Edward's main building in Austin, among others. They choose St. Louis as the patron of the parish, and it was built on the corner of Bowie and Crockett on one lot, 60 feet by 120 feet. The first Mass is celebrated August 28, 1881, At that point, we stopped being mission territory. We had a home of our own. The site is a recorded Texas historic landmark, not because the church was built there, but because of the 1937 Art Deco First National Bank building that sits there today. The first parochial school opens in September 1881 for 1 year. It lasted 1 year. It was a one-person show. Miss Angela Burke taught school, was the church organist, and the rectory housekeeper. This is Pearl Street in 1890. I'd often heard of the mud streets in Beaumont with the raised sidewalks. This was the first time I saw an image. I also read about the difficulties that the sisters had in their long habits getting to Mass in the muddy conditions. So Father Kelleth comes to St. Louis in 1892, and he sees the city is growing, and the parish has no room for growth. The church and the rectory were built on that one lot. So in March 1894, he buys property on Jefferson, Wall, Archie, and Forsyth directly from Mr. Van Warmer, who the plat or survey is named after. And he had the church moved to Jefferson, facing Jefferson. Father Kelleth dies in July 1895 in Houston of typhoid, and none other than Father William Lee was at his bedside. This is St. Louis Church facing Jefferson. Note the dirt road in front of the church. Father McSorley comes in August of 1895 and does two things that have a profound impact on Beaumont. The first thing he does is invite the Dominican sisters to open a school, which they do. October 1st, 1895, Our Lady of Perpetual Help School opens, 2 months after Father McSorley arrived. The other thing he does is he invites the Sisters of Charity to open a hospital, which they do. In 1897, Hotel Dieu opens. The two-story building you see behind the church was the first building that was constructed for the school. The lower level, classes were held. On the upper level, that was where the sisters lived. It was built in 1897. Now we're getting into Saint Anthony. I want to go through some definitions so you'll know what I'm talking about. This is a diagram of a cruciform. A cruciform is in the shape of a cross. It's the footprint, an aerial view of the structure. This is not our structure, it's just a structure. The apse is at the top that you see with the arched end, the semicircle. The transept is in the middle where the arms would be in a cross. The nave is the body of the church where the people sit, and the narthex is where you enter, or the vestibule. This is a generic diagram. Where it says crossing is where our dome is. So when I'm referring to parts, you'll know what I'm talking about. Two other terms that I'll use is a sacristy. A sacristy is a room where the priests vest and where supplies are kept. And I'll use the term ambo. Ambo is a pulpit where scripture is proclaimed. So I need you to use your imagination just for a moment. Look at the building behind the church, the little rectory. So when picture this block without the church on it. The rectory is in this back corner, and next to the church is the wood frame structure that I just showed you. That's all that's on the lot. When school opens in 1895, Father McSorley gives this building, the rectory, to the sisters, and they have class for the first 2 years in this building, and they live in that building. In April of 1897, Father William Lee comes, and with the intent to build a new church. The first meeting of the building committee, if you will, to build the church was January 4th, 1901. We all know what happened January 10th, 1901. 6 days before Spindletop, they had the first meeting to build the church. This time they hire Bryce Brecken, Beaumont architect, to design the building. They use sketches and prints from Father Lee's travels abroad. It's in a cruciform, a shape of a cross. The architect describes it as pure Romanesque architecture. The Southern Messenger said the facade was to be an exact replica of St. Mary's Church in Cork, Ireland. The Beaumont Enterprise said St. Paul's in Rome served as a model. They used day laborers, but Augustine Babin, a parishioner, oversaw the work. The Southern Messenger said it was to be a Roman basilica standing on Texas soil, a bit of foreshadowing. That was 1902. Groundbreaking was held June 7, 1903, and as a point of comparison, the First Baptist Church, which we know as the Terrell Library, began in 1902 and completed in 1903. It is a recorded Texas historic landmark. The McFaddin-Ward House began in 1905 and completed in 1906. It is a Texas recorded historic landmark and on the National Register of Historic Places. St. Anthony's foundation was completed, and 6 months were allowed to lapse for it to season and settle. But the walls were finished and put under roof by the end of 1904. January 27, 1907, it was dedicated, and the name changed to St. Anthony. In the photograph, two things to notice. Still dirt roads. So the church is built in 1907. Dirt roads, and interestingly, the cross is not on top of the dome. I don't know why. It's just a point. This is St. Mary's Church in Cork, Ireland. A few things to note for St. Anthony. Note the statue on top, the triangular pediment, the classic portico, the columns, and the steps. The foundation of this church was laid in 1832. Kearns Dean was the architect. He had done drawings of the Pantheon in Rome, entered them in an exhibit in Ireland, and it was dedicated in 1839. It's in the Romanesque revival style. St. Paul's in Rome. A few things to note for St. Anthony. The arcade of columns, the coffered ceilings, the apse, the triumphal arch at the end. The apse at the end and the triumphal arch. This transept was dedicated in 1840. Luigi Paletti was the architect, and it's in the neoclassical style. This is a postcard from, mine is dated 1913. Interestingly, someone sent Mamie McFaddin this postcard. Hers is dated 1911, while she was away at finishing school. The Beaumont Enterprise did the best description I have read of all the parts of St. Anthony when it was dedicated, and I'll use that throughout the presentation. The title was A Triumph in Classic Romanesque Architecture. They described the approach to the entrance. It's of paved concrete, large enough that the entire audience might assemble, which with the dirt roads, I'm sure that was an exciting thing. The first impression is one of invitation, as if a guest, the great structure is opening wide its arms to welcome the world. And the interesting thing there is when the plaza was done recently in 2004 for the renovation, the ramps were done in such a fashion to make it opening wide its arms. The front facade, the great central architrave, is supported by 4 columns of Texas granite, 3 feet in diameter, 40 feet in height, weighing 5,000 pounds, mined in Burnett, Texas, polished in San Antonio. They arrived in the Santa Fe rail yards in January 1904. And a story that's been passed down is that they stayed in the rail yard so long that the railway threatened to send them back because it took us so long to build. It didn't take us so long to build because of its complexity. It took us so long to build because we kept running out of money. The massive towers on either side, the upper sections are open bell towers. The roofs are supported on white arched crown columns. The red Dutch tile roof, which we know as Ludovici from Chicago, breaks the blue sky, a brilliant crown to the classic picture. The handsome statue of Saint Anthony, which is not in this photograph, interestingly, of Carrara marble surmounts the apex. There's a symbol of the cross from every gable, peak, and roof crest. The great dome towers to a height in perfect proportion. The walls are brick and massive, rich in appearance, laid in white cement mortar. Here's the statue of St. Anthony. A marble of St. Anthony to be placed between the 2 towers over the main entrance arrived from Italy June 4th, 1903. Interestingly, the groundbreaking was June 7th, 1903, so St. Anthony has stood on that site since before we broke ground. It was specially made for St. Anthony. It's about 8 feet tall, gray Italian marble, which has been painted white, perfectly finished and historically accurate as described by the Beaumont Journal. It was donated by a parishioner at a cost of about $500. The Beaumont Enterprise calls the inside of the church the auditorium. So, entering the auditorium reveals the lightest church interior ever. No shaft or glint of direct sunshine, all toned and subdued. The columns of Georgia marble, there's 4 on either side. The aisle ceilings are 2/3 the height of the main ceiling. A series of arches carried by columns with girders connecting curtain walls with the exterior walls. The ceiling is encased with richly molded and paneled boxes forming works of art. The main ceiling is a triumph of a woodworker's art. The altar steps of Georgia marble lead to an altar yet to be acquired. The altar that you see in the photograph on the left is a makeshift altar or a temporary altar. It likely came from St. Louis Church for the dedication. The altar rail, probably a brass, will separate the space. In the photograph, there is no altar rail. So likely this photograph was taken at or near dedication. A magnificent brass sanctuary lamp is suspended from the arch donated by a parishioner, which you can barely see in the picture to the left. And I put St. Paul on the right just as a point of comparison. More pictures of the interior. Note the rug down the aisle. Headlines at dedication: architectural triumph, a church that ranks the finest in the South, the Beaumont Enterprise. A triumph in classic Romanesque architecture, Beaumont Enterprise. Pure Romanesque architecture. In a century to come, it will be a picture as worthy of admiration as it is today. January 25th, 1907. And it was. On January 28th, 2007, we celebrated our 100 years. Classic dignity, massive style, perfect proportions, Beaumont Enterprise. One of the handsomest and costliest structures in the South. It cost $60,000 to build. That was at dedication. Fast forward, 1915. Notice no painting behind the altar in the apse. The church is 8 years old. Father Lee is still there. 8 years after the dedication, the main altar is realized through the generosity of a parishioner. The 20-foot tall altar was of white marble. It was dedicated December 1915 and cost $3,200. It was manufactured by the De Prado Statuary Company, who had studios in Chicago and in New York. We don't know which one ours came from. In 1916, stained glass windows in the transept are added, and I'll show you those in a minute. This postcard is from 1918, and notice the building on the side of the church, the white 2-story building. So the wood frame building that was there was moved down the block on Forsyth, and a new building was constructed. This is 1918 at a cost of $18,000. Do you see what I'm talking about? Right here. 1922, the building behind the church is the third rectory, completed in 1922 at a cost of $35,000. 1937, the church is 30 years old. Father Kelly is there. The interior white walls had become dull. So the entire interior of St. Anthony was redecorated. They call it redecorating. All paintings were added. They were done by a German artist in Germany, oil on canvas, imported and applied to the walls. The common colored stained glass and the rest of the church were fitted with stained glass. The cost of these decorations was about $32,000. And it made St. Anthony's one of the most beautiful church structures in the South, Beaumont Enterprise, again through the generosity of parishioners. Now, notice the vine behind the altar. That's the introduction of San Clemente, this is San Clemente in Rome, the 20th century mosaic of the Basilica of San Clemente. The spiraling design depicts the tree of life. It's one of the most iconic apse mosaics in Rome, if not the world. And notice the lambs at the bottom coming from both extremes approaching the altar. The altars, this is the only picture we have of the altars. They were original to the church. These are the side altars. But the stenciling behind them was added in 1937. That's why we have the pictures. So I'm going to describe the altars at dedication. In the transept, on either side are altars in white and gold that blend harmoniously. On the left is an altar to the Blessed Mother. They date to 1907. On the right is an altar to Saint Anthony, the patron of the church, 1907. They were constructed by the Dubuque Altar Manufacturing Company in Iowa, and they were a gift of the Ladies' Society. More pictures of the 1937 painting. German paintings. Notice on the left, the ambo is introduced. You see a tall, right here, right here, an altar is introduced, and lighting is suspended from the ceiling on the sides. Here's the ambo. And you can see the other painting on the walls and painting up in the arch. Fast forward, 1959. I added this to show it was before air conditioning. Notice the windows are open. They don't slide up and down, they pivot. And ventilation was through the dome. There were vents in the dome. At dedication, they described the dome. The central dome is a double dome. Interior are panels of glass. The exterior are panels of copper sitting over vents. Light is admitted through side openings in the walls of the base. The rays strike the inner roof panels at an angle. The growing frame of the dome ceiling is a work of art, a masterpiece. Fast forward, 1966, the Diocese of Beaumont is created. Saint Anthony is chosen as the cathedral. The cathedral gets its name from the cathedra, which is Latin for bishop's chair or seat. It's akin to, as the county seat is to a county, a cathedral is to a diocese. It's the mother church, the bishop's church. Bishop David Toops is our bishop. So I circled the bishop's chair. It's hard to see in this photograph, but I have a better picture coming up. This is at the dedication, the installation of the Bishop Harris, the first bishop. Notice the tile on the floor. Oh, no. Oh. Did I do that? Okay. 1963, on the left, notice the top parts of the side altars have been removed. 1972 on the right. If you look through the arches, you can tell they're completely removed. 1973, that's a better picture of the bishop's chair, the cathedra. I circled it. 1973, we go through another renovation. Father Enderley's there. New furniture is created that match the bishop's chair. It's all a laminate furniture, and it's kind of a modernist look. I guess a 70s thing to do. The cathedra, the altar, the ambo, the credence tables, the kneelers, and confessionals are all replaced. 1973, we repainted again. The church is 66 years old, and this time they did a refurbishing. Redecorated in 37, refurbishing in 73. The wood floors were all covered with carpet. Painting was restored by a local artist, Al Gaytan. The dark walls were painted, the stenciling retouched, pews refinished, kneelers replaced, carpeting added. These big light fixtures you see were added. The rest of the furniture was installed. The baptismal font was relocated to the altar. The Pope's coat of arms were added, and the rectory was remodeled. Painting, 1972, 73, and at the same time, the grounds were re-landscaped and outdoor lighting, architectural lighting was installed. I'll show you pictures of those. In 1976, through the generosity of a parishioner, a Wicks pipe organ was installed. On the left, you see the organ. That photograph is from 1937, but that organ served from 1907 to 1942. And then the 1976 Wicks pipe organ. It's not 1976. It was installed in 1976. It was used when we got it. Here is a photograph on the left of the landscaping that I mentioned, and on the right, the lighting that was installed. Monsignor Gregg's there. This is 1980. Two things of importance happened. We become a recorded Texas historic landmark in 1980. The architecture at the time of the recognition was called Italian Renaissance Revival. So we have pure Romanesque revival, neoclassical elements, but we are Italian Renaissance Revival. The other thing that happened in that period of time, the debt was paid off in 1982. 1986, Father Benny Patillo's there. We didn't like the modernist look. We want to go back to a more antique look. So the carpeting was removed from the altar. The heart of pine floors were refinished. A parishioner donates some Persian rugs. Antique furniture is acquired from the Incarnate Word Mother House in Houston. It was again repainted, recarpeted. Notice the red carpeting. And the chapel, hall, and offices were completed in 1990. 1996, Father Jerry gets there. His committee that he assembled, Lonnie Arrington, was a parishioner and an engineer who worked very closely with Father Jerry on both of these projects, plus some. Others on the committee were Anton LeBlanc, Tommy Frank, Robert Weibel, and Nick Baldo. They worked very closely with H.B. Neild, Tom Neild is here with us, on the repair and the renovation project. The repairs, we addressed roofs, gutters, termites, foundations, stained glass, painting, inside and out, HVAC improvements, sound system, and organ repair. In January 1999, we launched a capital campaign to raise $1.1 million for $1.5 million in repairs. We must have had some money in the bank. Then Bishop Guillory decides to do some liturgical renovations. So in May of 2002, we launch a $1 million capital campaign to reconfigure the altar, add a presbytery, a new baptistry, install 2 chapels, redo the center aisle, confessionals, pews, kneelers, a vestibule, and an addition. By the time both of these projects were completed and the change orders and additions that were done, we had spent $6.5 million. We'll begin with the repairs. The roof repairs. On the left, you can see the copper dome where tar had been applied to seams to keep the water out. A story that was handed down is one of the previous pastors, Father Mahalka, did not like pigeons, and he shot at them regularly. He must not have been a very good shot, because when they went to redo the dome, it was riddled with holes. On the right, you see decking. On the top, you see decking that was rotten that had to be replaced. And on the right bottom, you see under the cross, it was leaking. This is 2001. The church is 94 years old. The guttering was leaking, so it deteriorated the fascia on the left. The two on the right, you can see repairs that was removed and repaired. Termite fumigation. Termites had gone all the way up to the bell tower. Steps and porch. The steps and porch had settled and separated. This is an example of where the two projects merged together. Money was set aside to do the repairs of the steps, the porch, but when the renovation started, they revisioned it, and so they used the money that was allocated to the repair, added more money to it, so it became a change order. So you'll see I did it again. What am I doing to this thing? This is a before and after of the plaza. It started out as repairs, and it was a change order. And that's what it looks like now, before and after. Stained glass windows. On the left, you see the protective coating on the outside of the stained glass had discolored. In the middle, you see cracks developing in the solder joints. And on the right, we hired Cavallini and Company from San Antonio to restore the stained glass. They came and removed all the panels, brought them to their studio, restored them, returned them, and reinstalled them. These are the restored stained glass windows. These in the transept are from the Munich studio in Chicago and date to 1916. The Munich studio in Chicago was founded by a German stained glass artist named Max Guller. Another photograph of the stained glass in the transept. Our stained glass at St. Anthony, all of them are in the Munich style, which is a painting of glass rather than opalescence, which is a layering of glass. These are the stained glass that were done by Franz Meyer of Munich studio in 1937. The Munich studio of Chicago was in existence from 1902 to 1932. They did not survive the Great Depression. So in 1937, when they went to do the stained glass in the rest of the church, they found Franz Meyer, who had, it was a Munich studio, but he had also studio branches in London and in New York. Ours likely came from New York, but we don't know that. The Munich style is painting on small colored glass pieces coated with color overlay, tracing lines, melding colors before being fired and leaded. They produce a lifelike three-dimensional depiction, and the vibrant colors and intricate details animate the space. These are also Franz Meyer of Munich studio windows, 1937. These are, on the left is in the choir loft, and on the right is in the nave. Painting, because of the roof leak and the gutter failure, the paint and the plaster was peeling. Water damage. More water damage. Water is not a church's friend. The organ restoration. So it is a Wicks pipe organ that was installed in 1976. It has 3,128 pipes and 63 ranks, if that means anything to you. The choir loft, as described at dedication, the rail enclosing the organ and choir loft over the vestibule is in strict conformity with the architecture. The lines are compound curve. The center swing extends boldly from the wall beneath, creating a beautiful balcony. They describe the acoustics. So perfect are the acoustic properties that the small organ heretofore used fills the entire house with harmony. They had brought the small organ that was used at St. Louis Church to St. Anthony for the dedication. Not an echo or sound clash is audible. A speaker may be plainly heard in any part of the auditorium without strain. In this respect, St. Anthony's is well nigh perfect. Bowman Enterprise. Pointing brick, the wrong color mortar and or caulking was used to keep water out. The only thing we know about the brick, on the right, there was a push to get the church built because it was taking so long. There was a disruption in the supplier for the brick, so they used an alternate source. So there is a band of brick in the transepts that are a different color. I put the yellow circle around it to show you. Then the renovation starts in 2002. Notice the beige baseboard just above the brick line on the left. Right there. That's where the floor of the altar was. And then on the right, you see the main aisle work going on. Apse reconfiguration. So on the left, you see the wall that's supported by the gray columns. Those columns were removed, and that wall finished to the floor. That's where Jesus, Mary, and the apostles are now painted. Those gray columns that were original to the church now support the new Balticon. And if you look just beyond that, to the left, you see the white columns that were supporting the old Balticon. The 1915 Balticon are now in the entryways to the chapels. The Balticon relocation. This Balticon was 1915. Remember the Prado Statuary Company? It was described at dedication as white marble. It really is not. Scagliola, from the Italian word scaglia, meaning chips, is a fine plaster used in architecture and sculpture. Scagliola is a composite made of plaster of Paris, glue, natural pigments, imitating marble. It's akin to terrazzo. And the Regalico technique is a technique that was perfected by the De Prado Statuary Company, uses a resin composite material. So the altar really wasn't marble. Pretty just the same. Here's the Baltic and the new Baltic going up. It was moved forward. It was in the back of the apse, by the apse, very close, and now it was moved forward to be under the dome in that crossing section that we talked about a while ago. The bishop's chair, the cathedra. On the left, you see the picture. We saw it a little bit ago. The bishop's chair is on the right of the altar, right there. Now it's in the center behind the altar. The presbytery or presbyterium is a seating for priests that was constructed behind the bishop's chair. And the Baltic before and after. Notice that the main altar was cut down in size to fit under the Baltic. A new baptistry was created. So, the picture you see on the left, well, as you enter the church from the main steps into the narthex, or the vestibule, there's a door to the left. In that doorway was the original baptistry. The doorway to the right were the stairs that led to the choir loft. I don't have a picture of the baptistry when it was a baptistry, but when the baptistry was moved to the altar, that room became a sacristy. This is a picture of that room used as a sacristy on the left. In the middle is the baptistry after it moves to the altar, and on the right is the new baptistry. It's made of granite. Its location is intentional, as baptism is the point of entry into the church. It's about 4 foot 8 inches deep, and it has stairs leading down for immersion. It also serves as a holy water font. A Blessed Mother's Chapel is added. On the left, you see the 1907 altar with the 1937 stenciling behind it. In the middle is after the 86 floors were refinished. The floors were refinished in 86. You see that doorway? Behind that doorway was the priest sacristy. That wall was opened and now serves as the Blessed Mother's Chapel, which is on the right. On the other side, you see the 1907 altar, Saint Anthony altar, with the 1937 stenciling behind it. In the middle, you see the baptistry after it moved to the altar with this was after 86. The photograph was after 86 because the floors had been refinished. Behind that wall was the altar boy sacristy. That wall was opened up and now serves as the Blessed Sacrament Chapel. The altar steps and communion rail. The orientation of this photograph is standing in front of the altar, facing the altar, looking left and then looking right. This is immediately before the renovation. The altar steps were repurposed. They now surround the base of the Christ the Redeemer in the plaza and serve as steps to the cemetery in the garden. The communion rail was repurposed. It now serves as a railing for the presbytery, was added to as the modesty panels in the pews, and a gate was created for the Blessed Sacrament Chapel. New flooring was installed. You see the mosaics of the main aisle on the left and wood floors on the right going in. A before and after of the main, of the main aisle. The mosaics were done by Y.J. Lee in China. Confessional modification. On the left, you see original confessionals. In the middle of the laminate 1973 furniture that was installed. It was done by Charlie Messina, a master craftsman. He happened to salvage the wood from the original confessionals. And I'll tell you about that in just a second. On the right, you see the confessional after the renovation was complete. Pews and kneelers. The pews are original to the church. They date to 1907. They were done by the Texas Seating Company in Fort Worth. And at dedication, they were described as thoroughly modern. Pews of solid oak with an antique finish, most comfortable known of church furnishers. The design on the end is rich, ornate, and fully up to the standard. And the capacity at dedication was described as 600, but could go to 1,000 when needed. The foyer doors and an area to care for children. On the left, you see the doors originally. You can tell there's panels in those doors. In the middle, you see, I think these doors were installed after the air conditioning. They got panels for the return air vents. And then on the right, all that was replaced with glass so that families with disruptive children could step out and still see what's going on. The vestibule described at dedication is handsomely finished Texas yellow pine, glistening with an oil finish. Care was taken to select the panels of beautiful grain and shading. A new sacristy was added. On the left, you see is just a picture of the inside of the altar boy sacristy, but on the right, you can see the footprint changed. A sacristy was added, and it can be divided to serve for weddings, a place for brides to dress as well. Entry doors were replaced. On the left, you see the original wooden doors with transoms on top. On the right, you see the bronze doors that replaced them. Eva and Roman Felsar of Poland sculpted these doors. Lighting was modernized. The photograph on the left we saw just a minute ago, but at dedication, it was described, light in the sanctuary is obtained by a curtain wall supported by 2 pairs of Georgia marble columns. Light is admitted through the rear wall above the base of the curtain wall. No beam or ray may strike directly across the sanctuary. The effect is startling and charming. All the electrical equipment was hidden behind that wall and in the ceiling of the dome, so you didn't see it. In the middle, you see an antique clock in one of the sacristies. And on the right, all the overhead power lines were put underground. This is lighting before and after. On the left, you see the 1973 fixtures that had been installed. And on the right, you see the recessed lighting after renovation. Bell tower windows. Interestingly, the windows in the bell towers never had stained glass. Likely because the one on the left was the baptistry and the one on the right was a stairwell. But nevertheless, you might be able to tell they were amber in color and they weren't very attractive. The one on the bottom right, they had been changed with a darker color, and you can tell one of them had blown out. So the bell towers windows have been replaced with gilded windows. This is the dome before and after. Double dome, windows on the glass on the inside, copper on the outside. Another photograph of the dome. The ambo and altar. So I mentioned that Charlie Messina had salvaged some of the wood from the original confessionals. In the 86 renovation, he built that ambo on the left. But during renovation, we had a marble altar and a wooden ambo, and they're supposed to match. So Father Jerry had marble added to the wooden ambo and wood added to the marble altar to make them harmonize. HVAC, this is another addition. You can see the ugly ducts protruding here, here, and here. They were removed. Artwork preservation. We hired Ronan Associates to restore the artwork. He brought 2 painters from Poland that were trained in the technique of old-style painting, Marek Malarski and Roman Felsar. This is before. On the right, you see Marek Malarski. He's the lead painter. And if you notice, the canvas hanging from the scaffold is a little lamb on it. Artwork restoration. This is Catherine Monica Hay, who's also assisting with, local painter who assisted with the artwork restoration. Scaffolding. In 1937, 8 angels were installed in the back of the apse, all on canvas from Germany. During the renovation, those 8 angels were removed. 4 are installed in each of the chapels. The lambs before and after. 1937, Germany, all on canvas. Jesus at the Last Supper before and after. The angel Gabriel greeting Mary, 1937. Saint Hieronymus, otherwise known as Saint Jerome, before and after. The 10 Commandments, before and after. On the right, notice the holes in the bottom where the ducts were installed, just above the frieze line, right here. The top of the apse, before and after. Statuary. We have hand-carved wooden statues from Italy in niches that were done by Tommy Frank. Tommy was on the building committee. He's also a master craftsman as a hobby. He used the niches that the Stations of the Cross were in as a model and made 2 for these statues. These are the Stations of the Cross and are original to the church. They had been painted over many times, so during the renovation they were stripped. They're porcelain, so they were beautifully glazed and gilded. Mariana Mizell, it was a local artist that assisted with that, among others. Statuary. The crucifix hanging from the arch is original to the church. It now stands in the sacristy. The Sacred Heart that stood on top of the 1915 altar now stands in the hallway. The heralding angels, also that stood on top of the altar, the Baltican, are in the Blessed Mother's Chapel. St. Joseph, that you can see standing behind the ambo here, now stands on top of one of the confessionals. And Saint Anthony, that stood on top of his altar, now stands on top of the other confessional. Saint Anthony, that stood on top of the church, still stands on top of the church. He's about the only thing that hadn't moved. And then on the right, we have a new statue of Christ the Redeemer, who is it's a replica of Cristoforo Stati's sculpture over St. Peter's in Rome. And it was also done by Y.J. Lee from China. The angel that you see on the right of the altar now stands in the garden. We have 2 new statues. They're marble. They were also done by Y.J. Lee. And all of this comes together for our rededication on October 1st, 2004. In July 2006, Pope Benedict names Saint Anthony a minor basilica. The insignia of a minor basilica are a bell and an umbrella. This is our bell and our umbrella. There are 4 basilicas in Texas: Saint Anthony Cathedral Basilica, Saint Mary Cathedral Basilica in Galveston that we talked about, the National Shrine of the Little Flower in San Antonio, and the National Shrine of Our Lady of San Juan in San Juan. A basilica gets its name from, it's really an architectural term. It's a rectangular building with a round semicircle on one end, and it was used commonly as public buildings in Roman times. Well, in the early church, they converted basilicas to churches. And over time, it became used to be referred to as a church for its significance without regard to its architectural form. A basilica has the privilege to use the papal insignia. This is the insignia that was created for Saint Anthony when it was designated a basilica. You see the cross keys and the crown in the middle, those are the papal insignia. The blue in the middle comes from the Diocese of Beaumont. That's the Diocese of Beaumont insignia. On the bottom, you see the shell of Spain. And on the right, you see the fleur-de-lis of France. On the top, you see the flame in the book, representing Saint Anthony and his gifted ability to preach. And on the other quadrant is bread with the lily, representing he fed the poor and his purity. And it's set under an umbrella. The motto is to love and to serve. Headlines after the dedication and naming of a basilica. This was my favorite. A little bit Bob Vila, a little bit Michelangelo. Beaumont Enterprise. Church bestowed greatest honor, Houston Chronicle. Texas's fourth basilica, Dallas Morning News. A little Vatican in Texas, KTRK News, Houston. Breathtaking, Texas Highways. Heavenly Design, VIP Magazine. So in conclusion, we've explored a bit of the history of how St. Anthony came to be in the Church of Southeast Texas. The first Mass having been celebrated in 1690, 336 years ago. The parish, Beaumont Parish, established in 1881, or 145 years ago. The building, dedicated in 1907, 119 years ago. We've studied the Italian Renaissance Revival architecture and all the design styles, pure Romanesque, Romanesque Revival, Neoclassical, that led us there. And we've examined the various forms of art, stained glass, paintings, statues, mosaics, and sculptures. And we've reviewed the many transformations through the years, repairs, renovations, restorations, redecoration, refurbishing, and additions. This research is in no way complete. It's ongoing. It's the things that I deemed important in telling this story. I'm grateful for the many people who've provided information in helping make this possible. For those of you that knew a lot about St. Anthony, I hope you learned a little bit. For those of you who knew a little about St. Anthony, I hope you learned a lot. And overall, I hope I've piqued your curiosity over this piece of history. I thank you for your time and interest. Tell your friends, like us on Facebook or Instagram, and if you know any major donors interested in historic preservation, send them our way. One more thing, for those of you that signed up for the tour tomorrow, please park in front of the cathedral at 700 Jefferson in the parking lot, and we'll gather on the plaza at 10 a.m. for the tour. And if you are unable to make the tour tomorrow, you can call the parish office and schedule a tour anytime, as long as something's not going on. We have a team of docents that are ready, willing, and able to show you the facility.
We have time for a few questions. If you have a question, if you would just please raise your hand so we could get it in the microphone.
You know, being an accountant, I'm curious to know what the total cost was, and could you convert that into today's dollars?
Total cost of, well, I did do that. The $60,000 that it cost to build in 1907, if you put it in today's dollars, it comes to $2.3 million, which doesn't make sense, so I didn't say it, because we spent $6.5 million just putting it back together. So it could not be replaced for that. So I didn't, it's not meaningful, so I didn't share it. But I don't know, you mean total cost from beginning to end? Oh, no. We know bits and pieces. We don't know. There's a lot missing in between. So I don't know that answer.
You mentioned the cemetery. Who is buried there And who is allowed to be buried there?
It's actually, good question. Father William Lee, the builder of St. Anthony, is buried in the church. Bishop Harris, our first bishop, wanted to be buried in the church, but it couldn't happen because there was gas lines and all kind of stuff under there. So he was buried in the garden, which created the bishop's cemetery. So our second bishop was Boudreaux. He's in Louisiana. Ganter was our third bishop. He's in there. So we have two bishops in the cemetery, Harris and Boudreaux. And it's a bishop's cemetery. If you're ordained a bishop, you qualify.
We have time for one more question.
Right here. No? It was the same question. Okay. Very good. Thank you all.
We're so thankful for you for coming here and giving such an amazing lecture. Thank you so much. Thank you all for attending our lecture. Our next one is on February 19th. We hope you get home safely, and if you're interested in the tour tomorrow at 10 a.m., the sign-up sheets are in the foyer. Thank you so much. And another round for Mr. Chimeno.